interest. Are there any items that people need to declare an interest in? And my understanding, we are Corit. Yep.
Yes, we are, Mark.
Great. And whilst we await the family who are going to help us with our first Transforming Care patient story, just checking if there are any comments on the minutes that people wanted to make today. No. Obviously, we are a public meeting and we're always very grateful when members of the public do join us. I think we have just the one member this afternoon, so please do feel free to ask any questions. And Sam, I think you've been here once before. Hopefully you know how we work and you'd be very welcome to ask questions. We've obviously got a few different slots where we've put that in, starting with after section 8. But obviously do say if there's anything we can help or anything that isn't unclear. And we may just have to quickly check if there are any other matters arising before we go back. Are there any other issues that people wanted to mention from the minutes? I'm assuming not. Nope. In which case, whilst Rachel's phoning our patients, I don't know whether, Mark, you would want to give us some of the updates that you might have given. Are you able to perhaps go for that whilst we're just waiting?
Very happy to do that, Mark. Thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So in general terms, we sit here on the brink of winter, and I think with the weather that we saw over the weekend, we know that that's pretty much with us. We've been working on all of our winter plans with colleagues across the whole of the NHS to put us in the best position for dealing with winter, as we always do. We obviously have still COVID challenges that we're dealing with, and I think that we were pleased to see some of the COVID rates locally and nationally starting to come down. And then, of course, we do have the very recent news about the Omicron variant. We are still absolutely engaged with everybody else across the system and nationally in terms of the vaccination processes that are going on behind the scenes and everything that we need to do in terms of boosters. So still a very, very busy environment that we're dealing with, and primary care colleagues, I'm sure are much better placed than I am to be able to talk about all of the challenges, but those challenges continue not only in terms of the demand for services, but also in terms of vaccination. Whilst we're dealing with all of that, work continues in terms of recovery, working with all our colleagues in the hospitals and the large providers. Our focus is very much on ensuring that we are getting our public patients through to their operations and procedures that are required in the hospitals as quickly as we possibly can. Our focus very much on 104-week waiter patients and indeed everybody else who is on the waiting lists. Also very much in terms of diagnostics and different ways of working in order to be able to maximise the opportunity to get people to their places of destination in terms of the procedures and support that they need in the hospitals. While all of that is going on, we're obviously also continuing to work in terms of the development of the new ways of working going into next year. And on our agenda today, we are looking at the constitution or the draft proposed constitution for the new ICB, and we'll be considering that later on the agenda today. We have now a designate chair in place, which is obviously Sir Liam Donaldson. We've also now gone through the national recruitment processes that all of the ICSs nationally have gone through, and we have very recently announced Sam Allen, who is a Foundation Trust Mental Health Chief Executive from Sussex, who is our designate Chief Executive for our ICS of North Cumbria in the North East. So we look forward to welcoming Sam to the system, and I think that that's really helpful in terms of the fact that we have clarity about Sam's appointment, and that will then allow us then to continue on with all of the things that we need to do to put in place the ICB for next year. Whilst we do those things, the CCG, as a legal statutory organisation, which will be novating its responsibilities to the new ICB as it comes into comes to fruition on the 1st of April, we are doing all of the things that we need to do in terms of our responsibilities as a sending organisation to pass our all of our responsibilities and our assets and liabilities to the new ICB when it comes in place, and all of those things are now being worked through at this point in time. So Mark, I think those were the key things that I wanted to mention, but I'm very happy to answer any questions if people have them.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions on the update from Mark? And Rachel, I'm assuming that we're best just to continue whilst we try to explore whatever the issues are, but please do let me know once folk join us. Yeah, I can see you on the phone. That's absolutely fine. Thank you. So we'll just go on to our next item then. And I don't know if it is Mandy or Paul or who is best to take us through item 8.
It's me, Mark.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks.
Right. Item 8. It's the patient, public and care involvement experience and update. I won't go through it all because everybody's got access to the notes. So it's good to see the engagement forum going on. It's also really good to see what's happening with the SEND, item 2.2 in Newcastle. And it would be good to kind of review the work that's underway with the, sorry, lost my voice then, with the strategic group. It'd be good to see if parents feel that their voices are being heard through that forum, but it's an excellent forum. It's just overall on these notes, it's so good to see the amount of engagement that's going on and what sounds like true engagement as well. Good to see the engagement forum going ahead in public as well, and both the mental health transformation ones. Just a point to make, it's really good to see that involvement, especially with the different forums. But I suppose one of the things that we need to make sure is that engagement, that the people coming and representing people are getting information in a suitable form that they can put in newsletters and in emails to feed back to their prospective members. We've always stated that in the past, and I'm not aware that that is actually happening. I've not seen evidence of that. So it'd be good to know that we are giving people that kind of information so they can share it with their respective bodies. It's also really good to see what's happening with 3.5, children and young people. I think that's excellent. All that work with the young people. And nice to see them presenting as well to the main forums, which is really good. I thought that was a very positive move. 4.1, Doctors of the World. Well, I guess it's absolutely great that that kind of thing's being involved, especially for it's an ongoing point about asylum seekers, and I know we've got the first ones in Gateshead and Newcastle now that have come from Afghanistan, but constantly come from other places. What would be good is if the engagement team are going on our behalf is that somehow we have the voice representative of those refugees and asylum seekers, as they don't seem to have a voice on this forum in any shape or form, even if it's just be taken along as a guest person that can give voice to some of these things, I think would be very useful and in keeping with the way that we do things. I think that's the main things I do want to say, to be honest. What would be useful and what we've asked before is for information is to get the results of some of these consultations so that people can see them and be able to see them, or even to reference them and what has happened in relation to them, what people have said and what we've acted upon and what we've not acted upon and why. And we need to make sure that we've got a system in place that people can find that information and be referred to it. But everything's good. The Orange Book sounds brilliant. I love the work going around it. I like the idea of some surgeries going orange as well. It gives you nice little visions, doesn't it? And I guess the question a lot of people would ask, so I'll ask it for them, is roughly when's the teenage one going to come? The equivalent, as it were. Have we got any projected dates yet? And that's just a quick run through. Cheers.
That's very helpful, Paul. Thank you, and thank you for many that are doing the work behind the scenes on that really important area. Obviously, you've posed a number of questions, although some of them may come back to you to try and find out the answers, I suspect, Paul, not least about how we're making sure we complete that feedback loop and getting back to people. I don't know if anyone would like to be able to comment on the timetable for the green, but the adult, I'll try again. The older children version of the Orange Book, and when the teenage version of it might be ready. David, I don't know if you know the answer to that one before we come to Liz, who has a question.
I don't have a particular deadline on those. I think there are initiatives taking place slightly differently in Newcastle and in Gateshead. I think the teenage resource is more focused on the variety of local services that are available, whereas obviously the Little Orange Book had some very generic advice on how to support parents and carers with unwell children. So I think there has been some consultation work done with parents and carers in both areas, and I think the work is progressing. But as I say, we want it to be more about a more sort of collaborative approach, getting the local authority involved and a broader sort of remit of providers and individuals to support the work, rather than the Little Orange Book, which was very much about urgent care needs in small children. So timescales are uncertain, but the work is progressing both in Gateshead and in Newcastle.
Much appreciated. Julia, is that on this point before we come back to Liz?
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point to David, that it is a slightly different lens, so that the children's one was very much about urgent care and how to manage those issues. And as David says, we're consulting, especially on the back of COVID, giving advice for young people as to what they might want to do, and also from a mental health perspective, because that's taken greater importance. So as David said, it was important that we listen to what the young people were asking and get it right. So we haven't got a deadline.
Thank you so much. If we come back to Liz then.
Yeah, it was just thanks for that, Paul. It was really, as you say, really good to see so much going on. My question was about COOTH, the mental health service for children and young people. It's an online resource, because I've referred or signposted quite a lot of young people to that resource, but I'm not sure how it goes down with young people, or whether it has been effective or not. So there's a mention of it under Gateshead Public Engagement Forum. So the work of COOTH in providing mental health support to children and young people was also presented. So it would just be interesting to know a few more details about that, because it's something that we're using a lot in general practice now, but I don't know what the actual outcomes or, benefits or what young people really think of it.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone's able to answer the evaluation. It is something that I'm sure we could bring back to a further meeting. I don't know, Joe, if this was a separate question.
It is in response to that, Mark. Before we expanded COOTH, as an exec, we considered an evaluation. And to be honest, Elizabeth, it's one of the few things I've seen evaluate so well with young people. So it really did influence our decision to sort of roll it out further.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, just to say, actually, in the I think it was the last governing body meeting when we talked about mental health. In fact, contained within that was a reference to it being evaluated, not in depth, but certainly having an evaluation and being highly rated by the people that were going to it. But that was under the mental health heading.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any further comments regarding the patient and public involvement work. If there are not, I will come back to welcome Jackie to our meeting. Thank you very much for taking the time, and I'm also very grateful to Julia for suggesting this, and for Rachel for organising it. So Rachel, can I pass to you first? Would that be okay?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. I've got the pleasure of introducing Mr. and Mrs. Roberts today. I've been involved with both Mr. and Mrs. Roberts and Mark since I started in July 2019, so it's a really important point for me as well, obviously, to bring them along today to tell them their story. We've had a couple of difficulties in terms of the presentation, but I'm sure we're going to get through it. And I think what Jackie, I think what you're going to be doing is going off an iPad as opposed to a PowerPoint, but I think referring back to some of the pictures because she's worked really hard on the presentation as well. So Jackie, over to yourself, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jackie Roberts, my husband Duncan.
Hi there.
And we're parents to Mark, who's now 36. So just really wanted to go over his kind of story, what life was like from when he was little, and then school and after school. I had hoped that I'd be on my laptop because the presentation's on my laptop, but for some reason I can't get onto Teams, so I'm on an iPad. And I don't know what you'll get to see if I turn it round so that the camera faces the laptop. I think it's going to have to be.
Yeah, we can see some of that. If you did what. We can see some of that, and thank you again for both of you coming, and these stories are so important for us to hear as we try and make decisions for the public. If you did have those slides that we could email across, I'm sure one of us could share them if that would be an easier alternative.
That's the problem. I tried to email it to Rachel to see if it was what she wanted, but it's too big with the pictures in.
Don't worry at all. Well, we can absolutely work with what you're doing. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, I think what we said, Mark, is we can do it on Word. I think Mum had sent me some lovely pictures on Word.
I just screenshot I'll do that. I'll screenshot it and send it to you like that.
Okay.
So I don't know if you can pick out the picture. Is the writing backwards?
No, you're fine.
No.
Perfect.
Okay, so that's where Mark arrived, meeting Graham, his big brother. But I've put a note down here that Mark being born wasn't the easy second baby I'd been led to believe that happened. I felt at the time, I remember joking, saying I did all the work myself. He wasn't in a hurry to be born. So there's other pictures of me where I look absolutely drained. But okay, so you can see he was very cute when he was little. He was gorgeous, actually. People would stop and say how lovely he was. And we did manage a holiday with him to Mallorca when he was little. Then just different pictures from when he was younger, as first meeting Santa, having a sparkler that he wasn't frightened of, which he became later. He became quite frightened of sparklers. Like the beach, he liked to be outside, running, playing with things, so playing with water.
We thought just like a normal child, really.
Yeah, we did. We had no idea.
He just was slow talking, and he didn't seem to hear what anybody was saying.
Yeah, we didn't get eye contact. He didn't seem to attend to what people were saying. So we had his hearing checked, and they found he had what they call glue ear, which surprised me. But they put grommets in, and then we kind of realised it wasn't going to make much difference. But and they were surprised that grommets, or glue ears, they called it, could cause such deafness. They're referred to, because he absolutely just ignored people's sounds around him. These were different school pictures. So in the early days, he was very cute. And then he got a little bit where he was confused and maybe not so happy in school, or not so happy getting his picture taken anyway. One thing he did do when he was younger, though, he played a lot with magnetic trains, but he didn't see them as trains with wheels. He tended to pick them up, and he'd try and pick the whole train up. Well, obviously the middle bits just fell out. And then I just noticed as I put the picture up that he's got my boots on. I think he did used to go and put other people's shoes and boots on from the hall, These are just pictures with his brothers. So the first one, he's not looking too sure about it. And then he obviously got happier as he'd come home and mixed with his brothers. I think he has brothers he prefers. Tom, the youngest brother, wasn't, and Mark was nearly 5 when Tom was born, so I think Mark wasn't so patient with him, but he loves Graham, his elder brother. He still has a thing, he'll go up and touch his arm and smile at him. Alistair, the one just younger than Mark, was very bossy, so he used to get Mark to do what he was told, and Mark responded to that. It didn't matter that he was small. He just liked somebody to be in control and organise things. different birthdays. He was always happy. Again, probably happier when he was younger. Then he sort of had a bit of a fear of candles and flame, and he wasn't quite so happy as he got older. But he, you know, he enjoyed I think he enjoyed the attention when he was little. This was when he was at school at Carley Hill. Now he went to this school because what had happened when he was first diagnosed. We went to the Child Development Centre in Newcastle at the RVI, and they did a lot of talking, and I filled diaries in and different things, but nobody would quite say what was wrong. And I was expecting Alistair, and I think they maybe thought I was a bit fragile, so they didn't really say very much. And I was dutifully filling these diaries in every day about what had happened and what his behaviour was like. And so my mum, we pushed one man, actually, the speech therapist, and said, you know, what do you think is wrong? And he said, well, if I had to say something, I'd say he was autistic, but don't go looking it up, you'll just worry yourself. So I didn't, but my mum rang up the Tyne and Wear Autistic Society to see if they offered any support groups. And they told her that really that they were set up to fund the school, Thornhill Park School, and that would be very welcome if we wanted to go along and have a look. So we did, and that was the year they were actually starting a nursery group. So Mark was the right age, and he got a place going daily when he was 3 to the nursery. Then he progressed when he was 4. He went as a weekly boarder to the Carley Hill unit in Thornhill Park. So they're just pictures that they've taken when he was at school. One thing he did a lot when he was little, and he climbed, and he had no fear. I'd lose him and I'd find him right at the top of the climbing frame. But he also climbed inside, as you can see. He's trying to get on the top of the door, and he'd open the door and then lie across it on his tummy, and I'd just come in and find him dangling over the door, you know. But he never had any fear. He would just stay there or eventually climb down. Although there was one incident.
There was one incident where he actually climbed through a small top window. He was standing on the windowsill upstairs, and it was he just happened to move, and I just happened to caught my eye, and I realised and just grabbed him and pulled him in. I don't know quite how, but he's here to tell.
So all the windows got locked.
It certainly did.
One of them enjoying swimming. He did have a phase when he didn't like swimming so much, and I think there'd been an incident at school put him off. But when he went to Newbus, which was after school, one of the carers, Sarah, who was wonderful with him, got him back swimming again. And the one on the right with him eating the ice cream was just this last year with his Orbis group. So different school trips, he obviously outside a lot. Doesn't he look slim, Rachel? He's put an awful lot of weight on the last year, but he did enjoy, and what he tends to do on a couple of those pictures, if you notice, he would pick up a twig and kind of peel it, so that he was flicking the twig, and then he'd have lots of sort of thin strands that would flap, and he would be fiddling with it. He did that an awful lot, and also he would bite them and eat them. I think that's how his teeth got discoloured. It was sort of nature. And that was it. I just love that picture because he's got his arm around me and his arm around, I think he was called Phil. So that's when he was 15, and he was at the Thornhome unit of Thornhill Park, but they had a summer fair at Carley Hill in the end of term. That was just some pictures I found in his record of achievement doing different exercises that then I think at the end of that he would get like a certificate saying he could do different things, different PE moves. And again, more hill walking that he seemed to love. Being outside, yeah. Ball skills, again, these pictures I think were taken for some records. But he does seem to be enjoying it. Not quite sure how often he did the chores, but there's evidence there that he did, so. Yeah. And this is Sarah. Now, he absolutely adores Sarah, and we're very excited she's coming to visit him next week. She just wouldn't give up, because there was a spell when really Mark would only respond to big men because I think he felt secure, and with women he was a bit, just not very confident. And Sarah, I think, came along and thought, right, well, this is a challenge. I'm going to sort him out, and he'll do anything for her. And she did everything she could for him. She was always thinking of something different for him. And well, why shouldn't Mark have a go at that, you know? So she was wonderful with him.
They worked hard over the years.
Yeah, so he went shopping and he did a lot of baking he enjoyed. I think he's doing chocolate crispies there. But one of the problems was he couldn't always wait for them to be cooked. You know, if he made cupcakes, if he wanted to eat them. So I can remember one afternoon going and had the window open and them on the windowsill to try and cool them ready to be eaten because he couldn't wait that long. So family visit says Graham with him, his older brother, and he does definitely have a good rapport with Graham. Seems to find him fascinating, looking at his face and everything. And then there's me on the soft play. And then I used to go through if I wasn't at work, and we went bowling and had a pub lunch. We did a lot of pub lunches that he was fine, so long, you know, he had to occupy him while he was waiting to be served, but in general he enjoyed that. And visits home. The one on the left, I think, is around about 2014. So just about 29 he'd be. And the one on the right was a real turning point because he'd been at Rose Lodge and hadn't had such a great time with cooperation. He you know, was demanding food a lot, and he went through a phase where he wouldn't get dressed or be shaved. And the Orbis team got involved and brought him home. And that picture circulated. So Nigel, one of the Orbis team, was just over the moon. They were all almost in tears when they saw that he'd come home and he was dressed and he looked relaxed with his family. You know, that was a real turning point. So jigsaws were a big part of his life. He was strange though, because he'd do them and then he'd put them away in order. You know, we'd have to jumble them up again. So I don't know whether he was fancying cheating next time, but they all went away in order and we had to jumble them up for him. But strangely to say, this is where he went to, he had to leave because the hospital closed, and he went to Whitley Farm Cottage near Selby, which was a residential home. And we were amazed how he coped with the move, because we all were really worried. And he'd asked for a costume, but then he wouldn't put it on when it came. But he was happy to have his face painted. And that was the second day. So he was at a Halloween party. And then bonfire night, he got dressed, warmly dressed and was out watching the fireworks. And eating looks like a one on the left, fish and chips, I think. This was the one that blew us away. He went on the train to Leeds Christmas market. We couldn't believe it, that he could do something. Or we wouldn't have had the nerve to try, I don't think. Would have taken him in a car, but not on the train. So that was amazing, that one. And then he just found a chair in the corner of the living room that he monopolised. But strange to say, he'd get quite annoyed if you suggested a jigsaw. It was like different place, different rules. And I bought him a jigsaw just before Christmas, and he got really cross with me. And we had to give it away to somebody else because he wouldn't have it near him. So, but he did, Whitley got him back there swimming and trampolining while he was there. He enjoyed that. And then at Christmas, he enjoyed the Christmas. He came home with his Whitley staff. So he had Christmas, like a Christmas dinner with his family. And then he had Christmas at Whitley as well, decorating the tree. But sadly, he couldn't stay at Whitley because when lockdown was looming, there were lots of changes going on. I think his favourite carer was absent for a while because her mum died. And he became too erratic, and the manager considered he was too challenging, which was such a shame, but we kind of realised that he just couldn't really be trusted. It was a lovely, ideal place for him, but we couldn't trust his aggression. So he moved to Rose Lodge. I mean, that was all down to Rachel because we were really worried about where he'll go. At one time it was, possible that he was going to have to just go anywhere in the country who would take him, but there wasn't any staff. There were beds, but no staff because of lockdown. And it was just a really worrying time. But he went to Rose Lodge and we were really relieved because he was finally safe, that they knew what they were expecting. And he was near that, we'd never been that near for a long time. but we don't have many photos. That's him sitting in reception. You can see, have to bribe him with sweets to get him to sit down. And he wasn't very cooperative there, and he had a spell of not getting dressed or getting shaved, which was really quite depressing, but they worked through it and eventually got him dressed. And then Orbis came on the scene and started taking him out. And the picture with the hopscotch is with Paul. Now, he loves Paul. He'll do anything for him. And Paul's been wonderful for Mark. He tries all sorts. He's been very active in the garden. He's got, he organised, well, he kind of persuaded me to organise National Trust and English Heritage membership. So he's got a visit out somewhere every day. And the one on the right with him running was just, everybody thought that was so wonderful to see him enjoying himself so much. So they took him bowling again, which he's really happy about. You can see probably at this stage he had put a lot of weight on while he was at Rose Lodge. So they're working. You can see the 8 Forest Gate, that's his new forever home. And you can see the pictures I get. The first pictures I've got were proof that he's eating healthy food. They're not giving him fattening stuff. He's getting healthy food because they're trying to get some of his weight off. And I think he has lost a little bit of weight since he was at Rose Lodge. Now Mark's elder brother Graham fitted one of the bedrooms out as a sensory room for him. So there's some pictures there, and then there was a video we made. I don't know if you can see how well you'll see this.
It's amazing, isn't it? What it's done.
It's all kind of Mark proof. It was all boarded up with only like touch switches, so Mark could work it all without being, getting annoyed with it or switching it off or anything. So. This was another trip he went. There's Paul with him on the right. I think it was Tanfield Railway they went, and he loved it.
Just loves being out and about.
Yeah. And then this is the garden that, again, Paul and Steve, another one of the carers, have worked really hard on it because it was a bit of a mess. I had new lawn laid and very knowledgeable with their choice of plants to get different colour, and the coloured fence to make the benefit the colours of the plants. There's now, I haven't got a picture of it, there's a raised bed with herbs in that Mark can tend, and I wasn't sure what Mark would make of it, but these are some sensory objects he put on the fence that Mark can just go along with, like a twig or something, and make a rattling sound and feel different feeling. And these are pictures of him in the garden. So he's cutting the lawn and he's spraying, he's picking things up that we just never thought he would. But he really is, getting the best out of everything. And that's just one of them chilling. I just thought that was a nice picture of him in his living room. He spends a lot of time in his living room. So that's it.
Thanks, Jackie. And I just want to say as well, just to put things into perspective, so Mark was in hospital for about, I'm just thinking it was nearly 20 years, wasn't it?
It was 15.
Yeah.
He went when he was 19, and then left when he went in 2004 and left at the end of 2019. He was 6 months at Whitley and then a year in Rose Lodge.
So just for everyone's understanding as well, so the reason we had to move Mark so quickly from Newbridge Grange was because obviously at that time it was closing, so that was kind of why I got involved so quickly. But I think at the time Mark had been on what was called a DOL, so Mark was classed as an informal patient, so he wasn't there under the Mental Health Act. So we had a choice then really to kind of think a little bit more out of the box about where Mark could be moving to. But unfortunately, I think just due to time constraints, and then we had difficulties finding a provision, that's why Mark had to go out of area. But it was always about Mark then being repatriated back to the Newcastle area. That was always our plan. And I'll be honest with you, there was a lot of difficulties, wasn't there, Mum and Dad? It was really difficult. I mean, we had discussions with the local authority who didn't agree. They felt he should be in hospital. There were so many things. just to put things again in perspective, I mean, Mark at that point was requiring 5 to 1 at times, wasn't he, as well, because he was having daily restraint. They were deeming Mark as being really challenging, so there was a lot of difficulty. And it wasn't, like I say, until we had the opportunity, I think, when he went out of area, obviously then moved back over, you can't believe the difference in him now. He's literally got 2 to 1 overnight. He has 3 to 1 through the day, just really for, you know, support, but he hasn't had any restraint in over 18 months. Is that about
went at all?
Yeah.
They was
doing
one
absolutely
the
brilliant.
time that he wanted to get in the utility room and to hang the washing up, and they had to explain, so he sat on the floor and watched the timer go round and wait, and then took it out and hung it up. He didn't realise, he thought he just wanted to hang the washing up, but that's the only slight bit of mild aggression, was to get this washing hung out. Been absolutely, I mean, some of the staff, when they were interviewed and they were told what to expect, that they say that they can't believe it, because it's just not like that now.
Yeah.
Because it's all Mark centred, which is perfect.
I've got to say, Orbis have been a great team, really well put together, just tailored perfectly for.
They've all got the different strengths, you know, that they do different things. But this Sandra does the craft work with them, which I don't know how keen he is, but he makes some lovely things, presents for us, cards and things.
I think there's quite a few people asking questions. I don't know who was first, though. I don't know if it was yourself, Julia.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Rachel and to Mr. and Mrs. Roberts, because from my perspective, you know, obviously we'll have to deliver things to timetables, and we'll look at a lot of numbers, and we'll see the cases in Rose Lodge. And it's really important that we stay focused on what's best for our patients and their families. And I think the story you've told today really brings that home to us, about how with the right care wrapped around the patient and their family, we can really do a better job. So just a huge thank you. And I found that really, really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Julia. I'm not sure if it was Dominic or Joe next. Sorry.
Go on, Dominic.
Yeah, so thank you again. I think that's a really great story to hear, and that Mark's obviously extremely loved, and it's clear from the photos that he loves being with people that love him, and that he thrives in those environments, and Orbis does have a very good reputation, and it looks like they deserve that reputation. This is an area that I've been very interested in for a number of years anyway, and I'm sort of interested in your perspectives about the hospital stays. And given what you've now seen is possible for Mark with a tailored package where he appears to be thriving, and he appears to not be demonstrating the behaviours that everybody was finding problematic. What are your reflections on the hospital option, and what do you think should have been available when hospital looked like it was the only option?
Yeah, well, I have to admit, when Mark actually left school at 19, the provision was similar idea to where, well, similar-ish. It was a care team in a private residence, but it was shared. He was going to share with 2 other lads. I don't know what their issues were. I don't think they were autistic like Mark, but I know one of them was epileptic. And the package really wasn't ideal, because I think there was one person there overnight, and this lad, of course, was epileptic. Well, he could have had a seizure through the night, and what would have happened, etc. But we were still kind of going along with it. But there were 2 quite youngish women that were the team organising it, and we think Mark just became too much for them. So eventually they said they couldn't handle him. You know, we think the social worker at the time said he thought that they were frightened of him. You know, and Mark knows that he needs somebody to be bossy with him. Even little Alistair, you know, who's younger than him.
Just have the confidence in people.
Yeah. So that fell through. So he actually went to Newbus as an emergency, and I was not happy, because I felt that they should have just improved the setup that they were going to have. You know, they should have got more staff and that, and or Mark, it should have just been for Mark, you know, if that was how it worked. I wasn't happy with Newbus Grange because I thought it was a long way away, of course, which was only an hour away. But however, but he went, and we liked it, and we didn't really ever think of it as a hospital. You know, they had, okay, it did have like the big, you know, they'd all sit round tables for their food and big kitchens serving food and that kind of aspect, and then they shared living rooms and things. But they did a lot with him. There was a guy at the beginning called Peter who was amazing, the research he did. I remember him taking the humidity levels in the garden to just see what might trigger Mark, you know, and his various outbursts. So we were actually happy with Newbus, but we knew that it was looming, that he couldn't stay there because he wasn't actively receiving treatment. He was just being like cared for. But the ball started rolling years ago, really, and we'd go to meetings and it would be same old, you know, Mark needs this, Mark needs that. Yes, we know, and then nothing happened, and we kind of wondered if it was all to do with funding issues, that people didn't want to change things in case that the funding wasn't going to be managed or whatever. Yeah. So it came to a head when they closed. We weren't even told. We just suddenly we were chatting to what we used to FaceTime on a Sunday evening, and one of the carers said she started to get upset, and we said, "What's the matter?" And she says, "Well, I'm going to miss him when we close." And we said, "We didn't know anything about it." So that kind of suddenly got things. Well, what's going on, you know? And he was going to go to this place in Hartlepool, which was another kind of small, it was a house converted into small flats with care staff, and it would have been lovely. It did in theory sounded lovely, but with the building closing, they were moving furniture and staff were changing, and Mark can't handle that, not so suddenly, and he just flipped, and you know, he had a really bad time. And I think at that point he might have even been sectioned, Rachel, so that he couldn't go to this Hope House they withdrew their offer. So, I mean, Rachel and Kelly had to suddenly, within days, find something for Mark, safe and, you know, that would work. So it was amazing, really, that they did. And I mean, Whitley was lovely. Again, it was 2 hours away, but we got in a routine where we'd go down and we'd stay overnight and see him like both days. So, you know, again, we were happy, but I suppose we didn't know what it could have been like. We didn't realise how good Orbis, their package. Rachel was keen for that all along, but it was the time. We didn't have the time. They said they could help us out, but it would not until about 6 months. So we knew we had to wait. So this time, while he was in Rose Lodge, was really just the waiting period. But it was worth it, I think. Looking back for what he's got now. But I agree that we didn't think of Newbus as a hospital, but my concern about being on his own was there was a lot in the news about abuse and, you know, different things like that. And I felt that the more people involved, the more whistleblowers there'd be, the less likely something like that could happen. But I hadn't quite realised that he'd have a team of 12 or whatever he's got, 9 or 10 or whatever. I thought, you know, it would be 2 or 3 and things might not be quite right, but really, it's just been perfect. And yes, I wish I'd known what it would be like years ago. We don't know really, but he's you know, he's probably had quite a frightening life a lot of the time, a lot of the changes that we couldn't explain to him. I mean, even those school photos, you know, he got a bit more puzzled and frowning, and, you know, towards the end that, you know, his life must have been worrying for him. And now he's got people that are there entirely for him to help him come to terms with things and understand.
Just in terms of his forever home as well, we actually got that through the capital funding through NHS England Transforming Care. So that has come on the back of that. So we were really fortunate to get the bid. And we've got additional monies as well for adaptations from home. So it's been
it's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, it is beautiful. I mean,
it is. It's got he's got a large bedroom with an ensuite that he's always had en-suites where he's been. So I was keen that he would still have that. I don't know how he'd feel if he needed the loo and somebody was in, you know, and he wanted to to get in. So it's been absolutely perfect. It's like tailor-made, but even the building as well as the care package, you know, it's wonderful.
Yeah, if ever there's a success story, this is it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that is such a marvellous story to hear, and thank you so much for sharing some really intimate details, and it is really helpful to help us who are making decisions about lots of people's lives. So we're really, really grateful for you sharing his story, and really hope it continues to work out so well for him and for you both. But thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you, Rachel, and thank you again, Julia.
See you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too. Bye.
We're really grateful for them both joining us, and I appreciate we're running a little bit late on our agenda, but we will go straight on to our quality section on section 9. And I think, Julia, you're going to lead us through that one, if that's okay. You're on mute though, Julia.
Yeah, sorry, Mark. I'm having a few technical issues with Teams, so I don't know if you want to move on and come back just while I try and get back in.
No problem at all. I don't know, Joe, if you want to start off, or
yes, if I cover the performance and finance section of the report, Mark. Sorry, I was just toggling myself off mute. In terms of the performance section in the NHS constitution targets that we see on page 13, I think just by the way the binary colouring between green and red, it just demonstrates how much the service is currently challenged in terms of delivering NHS constitution targets. We have, since we last met as a governing body, had significant pressures on hospital admissions arising from COVID. However, we are seeing some green shoots of recovery by way of reduced admissions. Nonetheless, we need to see what the potential impact of the new variant may have on hospital admissions. Just by way of trying to support the hospitals over winter, we as a CCG have invested 2.7 million in winter schemes, which I'll come on to in a minute. But in terms of trying to restore or recover routine activity or prioritised activity as far as possible, we are seeing referral to treatment times plateauing. In terms of September, gated hospitals was at 97.1%, and Newcastle was at 71.4%, and over 2-week waiters, as Mark referred to earlier. In terms of mid-November, there were around 25 at gated hospitals, but in terms of Newcastle hospitals, there were over 5,000 patients waiting in excess of the 52-week wait, and it's a measure of a sense of activity pressures in a major tertiary centre. Just by way of the 104-week plus waiters at North, there were around 222, with particular pressures in spinal, ophthalmology, dermatology and plastic surgery. So some specific specialised pressured specialties that we are seeing some particularly long waits. Bill, you want to come in just on cancer stuff?
I'm happy to come in at the end of this just to sort of pull a few things together, if that's all right, Joe.
That's absolutely fantastic. I'd be grateful for that. And diagnostics, again, we are seeing sort of pressures in terms of recovery rates. Diagnostic rates at gated hospitals around 34%, slightly better in terms of meeting the 6-week standard at nothing around 21%. And again, we do see some particularly pressured diagnostic tests that are really causing some long wait problems, particularly around sort of echo and audiology. We are using the independent sector where we can, and also the diagnostic hub is now opened at Blaydon, which will help in terms of meeting some of those pressured waiting times. In terms of the cancer performance, and Bill will come in a minute, we are seeing some pressures in skin melanomas. We are back to the 2-week waiting time in terms of some of the recovery trajectories on some of the cancer sites, and we are having wait list initiatives, in particular some cancers around sort of urology We are seeing some successes in lower GI, and I know Bill is dying to apprise the governing body in terms of fit testing. But again, we are seeing or supporting other parts of the region around gynae oncology, particularly supporting these South-East services, both at Newcastle and at Gateshead. Bill, do you want to just apprise the governing body around fit testing?
Well, yes. The executive was asked to support fit testing at risk some years ago, 3 years ago, pre-COVID, for non-urgent patients to try and triage them better. And that was passed. And then when the COVID came, we realised that recovery would have to do something dramatic. And so fit testing was agreed for as part of the suspicious pathway. And we now have some data that show the average monthly spend on combining colonoscopy and fit testing is about 130,000 a month for our CCG. Pre-COVID, the colonoscopy costs, because we weren't doing fit in those days, was 170 odd thousand. So we've actually saved 40,000, which actually is neither here nor there. What is important is we reduced the number of unnecessary colonoscopies, and therefore we've reduced the risk from colonoscopy because it's not without its risk, and yet achieved the same level of diagnostic rate that we have done for the past 10 years. So we're not missing patients. And we've always said to our GPs, this isn't a test whereby it's the only thing that's important. It's got to be done in the context of the patient's symptoms. But it's really helped. And just if I could, Joe, I know we're tight for time, but I think it's worth saying there's a lot of work that's been done collaboratively with Newcastle hospitals for ophthalmology, say, when we supported the cataract pop-up centre, for dermatoscopes, which is where our primary care colleagues have really come up trumps with supporting this, and that's reduced the waiting times for dermatology. It's still not anywhere near where we want to be, but it's a lot better. And just finally, at our North ICP meeting, we have a lay member who's with us, and she was staggered to see how much cooperation there was between commissioners and providers, especially over the gynae oncology, because Gateshead just stepped up, took on these gynae onc patients that could no longer be managed in Middlesbrough, and at the same time, Newcastle hospitals were taking some of the lesser complex patients as well. And she pointed out that she hadn't realised just how collaborative health delivery was on this aspect.
Thanks, Bill. Just then quickly, if I may, just have a few seconds on the financials. Those are set out on page 36 of the report. In the interest of time, and we previously apprised the governing body around the sort of outturn position, we do anticipate us achieving our financial target for the second half of the year, that being just over £1 million. And that is on top of us investing, as I've already said earlier, 2.7 million in winter schemes to support service delivery over the winter pressures, but also investing 2.8 million in inequalities initiative as we support those most vulnerable in our communities and the impact of COVID. And we're also working with our local authority colleagues about how we can support the social care system over the winter period. Margaret, are you wanting to come in?
Yes, it was on the waiting list data. Given the projections for number of over 1 year and over 2 year waits, I think we're not expecting to see rapid progress anytime soon. And I guess that's because the bulge of patients coming in at the front end are pushing through. So it's going to be a slow journey to reduce waiting times to what they were before the pandemic, especially as the workforce is already very pressured. But I was just wondering, for example, for hip and knee replacements and cataracts, is there any assessment of disability of patients waiting. You know, you often see patients on the news saying they're in such pain from their hip and their knee they can't go to work, so that's a loss to the economy. Are we taking disability into account as well, or are providers taking it into account?
Bill, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, Margaret, it's a really good point. Every trust is expected to carry out an assessment of the patients on their waiting list to make sure that they haven't come to any harm. It's called a harm review, and we keep a close monitoring of those patients who are in the non-urgent, the P3 category group, that need to be moved into a P2, a more urgent category group. So, in a word, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz, and then Dominic.
So just thanks, Bill and Joe. Just two questions. One, Bill, about the dermatoscopes and general practice. Has it been shown that they decrease the need for face-to-face outpatient appointments then? So that's the first question. And the second question was about the diagnostic hub at Blaydon. Are they doing echoes there, or what's the expansion there at Blaydon, please? So it was just two questions.
Yes, and I don't know.
Shall we move straight to Dominic, who probably would be able to give more detail on the yes if you wanted?
Yeah, so the dermatoscopy initiative has drastically reduced the waiting list for those 2-week waits because many patients from the photographs can either be reassured or be sent straight for biopsy. So it's massively improved the efficiency of the pathway already. I don't know about the echo either, but what I was going to say about the long waiting list is that the provider collaborative, which has recently formed in the Northeast, has a waiting well initiative that it is looking at, and we're asking them to try and prioritise people based on deprivation or disability or other factors that might mean that reasonable adjustments are required. But we haven't been given the details of that initiative yet, but it is underway.
Thanks very much, Dominic. And Liz, or if anyone else did manage to get onto the timeout with the Queen Elizabeth, they did describe their recovery plan for the echoes using external providers and trying to manage the waiting list back to something we'd more normally expect by the end of the calendar year. So I'm sure that that's probably all linked. Are there any further questions for Joe before we come back to Julia for the quality section, and hoping that your Teams is working now, Julia?
Yeah, I'm back. Thanks, Mark. Shall I just move on?
Go for it, please.
So I'll draw colleagues' attention to, I don't intend to go through the report in detail because everybody's read it, but if you just turn to the bottom of page 9, I'll draw your attention to the serious incidents that have been reported. So we're looking to do some benchmarking between the acute tertiary centres, because obviously some of those numbers look significant, and we thought it was important to look at those other Shelford trusts, so we're doing that. The other thing is the pressure ulcers, we're triangulating that in terms of the delays that patients have had to see if we can track the potential harm through the patient pathway. So once we've done that piece of work, I'll look to bring that back, and it'll, you know, give us some advice one way or the other. But I know that certainly Moya Cushlow, the chief nurse at Nuts, doing a deep dive into that work. Similarly, on the report and compliance, you'll notice that there was a significant delay at Gateshead QE Hospital. Jill Finlay is now the newly appointed chief nurse at the QE, and she provided us an update during the week at the QRG that they've done some significant work to clear that backlog. So before the next governing body, I'm expecting that those numbers will have improved significantly. And I think that's probably all I need to draw your attention to. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Dominic.
Thanks, Julia. There are a couple of things that I thought were worth looking at and noting as well. The GP patient survey section shows that as of July, patients were generally very satisfied with the services that they were receiving from general practice. And I just think that should be noted in contrast to perhaps some of the media rhetoric around GP services. And then I also thought it was quite interesting on page 8. I wondered whether, Julia, you had any insight. The Friends and Families test in terms of inpatient experiences for Northumbria looked significantly lower than other trusts. And I know we don't use Northumbria's, or our patients and public don't use Northumbria's services extensively. But I'm just interested in whether we have any insight into why there's such a difference with other trusts. And then similarly, it looks like we have an issue with staff well-being, satisfaction in terms of the staff FFT and recommendations to others to work there for NIAS.
Do you have any comments there, Julia?
I don't know the answer to the Friends and Families test, Dominic, but I know that Northumbria have a different approach in terms of receiving patient feedback. So it might be that they're utilising a different method rather than purely relying on that test, but I'll check that out and come back to you. And with regard to NIAS, we're aware, obviously in terms of the COVID challenge that the NIAS staff have been through, there has been significant sickness absence that we've been managing, as well as the other challenges with, as you rightly say, the workforce and how that's been dealt with. We know that as we've come out of COVID, all of the staff that we have working across the health system have been exposed to significant levels of aggression, and, you know, particularly NIAS staff on the front line, that's really worth noting. So, you know, there's lots of discussions about how we can support the workforce, how we can look to provide different work patterns, perhaps be more attractive in terms of home working for call handling, etc. So just to assure you, there is a lot of work being undertaken with NIAS colleagues on that.
Thanks very much, Julia. Are there any further comments that anyone has on any of these sections? I guess, as Joe mentioned before, obviously there's still quite a lot of red that we see around these services, very long waits, very difficult times for patients, and as we said earlier, lots of people in those waiting lists that we're trying to work desperately to support in lots of different settings. So thank you so much for giving us that update and for all the work that sits behind there. We really appreciate it, but I guess it is just a summary of the huge challenges that our services face at the moment as we desperately try and recover the activity levels we used to have. We're going to move on now, if that's okay, onto section 10. We don't actually have any of our directors of public health able to join us today, but Julie was going to give us a quick update of some of the biggest issues that we're facing with our public health, which is obviously related to the COVID work. So Julie, can I just pass to you for a very brief summary? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So we continue to have our surge calls, which include the COVID updates twice a week. They are on an ICP footprint and they feed into the ICS discussions where we escalate any issues. Those issues are at the minute particularly related to workforce challenges and getting the right communications out. I'm sure colleagues will have seen in the press where there's the balance of COVID numbers. So generally the numbers in hospital have reduced. The latest data I saw was 40% less than they were this time last year, which is great. Obviously, the impact from the COVID vaccination programme that Jackie and Lynn have led on with colleagues in a place-based footprint. But I think it's the overlay of COVID, flu, RSV in children, the workforce pressures that we're seeing, and making sure that we've done everything that we can to support our services and the planning that we've done to get us prepared for winter. Although I think winter started in July for us at the minute. And then clearly we've just been dealing with the aftermath of Storm Arwen. So that's caused significant pressures in terms of our more rural communities in particular, who've had for some period no power for 5 days, no water, and mobile phone communications have been down. So working with our local authority colleagues to make sure that we've identified our vulnerable patients and we've got the right care and support in. But as I say, Jackie and Lynn are cited on that with that place-based focus. So I think the guidance with regard to the new variant, we're very much waiting to see how that's going to play out and what the implications will be. Maintaining our focus on the vaccination programmes and being flexible as those cohorts change, and we know that we've still got more to do, and just reinforcing some of the comms around mask wearing. So as you'll have seen in the news as of today, the compulsory mask wearing for shops and other confined spaces has been reintroduced. The concern is how that'll play out with the public in terms of their compliance, but that's kind of a watch and brief. So still lots of work being undertaken, and just a huge thank you to all our staff, because it really has been, frontline staff are just really still having to keep delivering day after day and still doing what they need to do. So we're very fortunate that we've got that commitment.
Thanks very much, Julia. And I don't know if anyone does have any questions for Julia on this or any other points they want to add in. And obviously, this is very much questions for the public as well. It doesn't just have to be those on the board with each of these items. Paul?
Sorry. It's just to say a big thank you to the staff, really, all the staff, because it's just so exhausting, constantly all this happening. But knowing that numbers are coming in and making it worse, and knowing that you can't do your normal job and get that kind of satisfaction. And I don't think people appreciate how much that builds up on people in that sense. And it's no wonder many staff are ill, sick, stressed. And it's a wonder that people keep continuing and managing to meet all the new demands. So a big thank you, really.
Thank you, Paul. Joe, then Margaret.
Thanks, Jeff. It was just to make the point as well. I mean, the amazing things we see happening on the front line wouldn't happen without the amazing things we see in support services. So it is right across the NHS in terms of staff and staff support.
Thank you. Margaret?
I just wonder, thinking laterally, is there any more that can be done to persuade people who haven't been vaccinated to be vaccinated? Because early on in the pandemic, we had people like Lenny Henry and other celebrities on the television saying, go for it, this is the sensible thing to do. Is there anything else that can be done that we can think of?
And I think everyone is asking that question. There is a lot of brainstorming going on. Obviously, we're trying to up the amount of vaccine that is delivered in our booster program. We're very much trying to work with our public through lots of different routes, whether it's through community groups, large scale media, and I'm sure others may want to comment. One statistic that I've been using with a number of patients recently is that a tweet from our chief medical officer, which I thought was very helpful, that of all the pregnant people that have been in the hospitals, either dying from COVID or were severely ill, none of them have had a vaccine. As in, if you've had a vaccine, you're not in that group. So I think there are some very sad stories out there from those that haven't had vaccines, and I think it's trying to work out how do we help our public understand that risk when currently it's not them affected, but in the future it might be, sadly. And yeah, there are many stories we see, sadly. Bill, then Jackie.
Thanks, Mark. I was in town and just walking past Gray's Monument the other day, and I had a mask on, and there were 3 or 4 youngsters, no, not youngsters, in their 20s and 30s. They were slightly the worst for wear, but they shouted at me, "Real men don't wear masks." So I shouted back, "Real men don't give virulent viruses that are lethal to their family and friends." And actually was supported by quite a few people around there that sort of applauded. So I thought, we have to keep going on at this. We have to get the message out. If you want to be alive and your relatives be alive, get vaccinated.
Thank you very much. We've got Jackie, then we've got Louise.
Yeah, I think it's been said really, but just to reassure Margaret that there's no end to our efforts really, that they will be ongoing, and that, vaccine hesitant individuals aren't being offered once, they're being offered on multiple occasions, and we're finding that actually there comes a tipping point where some are taking that up because they, that we've been through all the fears that they may have, we've supported them to be able to access, etc. So it's an ongoing programme in both Newcastle and Gateshead.
Thanks very much. We'll make Louise's the last point before we come to our next section, section 11.
Just following on from Bill's point, obviously I use public transport, I've been around shops, and you are now in the minority if you wear a mask. And people do look at you to say what you're doing. So I'll be interested to see how it changes from today, because I'm guessing that it might not.
Good point.
Might not.
Thank you, Louise. And I guess we hope that there will be enforcement again. And certainly, and I know there are certain areas that do enforce it, but you're right, the majority have not. Let's hope that changes, and let's hope our public do get protected. And certainly, we have seen a number of people die from this virus in our practice over the recent weeks. It is a horrible virus, and obviously, we desperately want precautions to be upped. We'll say thank you very much for everyone's comments there, and we'll move on to our next section. I'm going to introduce Mark to sort of give a few opening words before we pass across to Ali Wilson, who's joined us for this item. And I guess many people will be aware of our integrated care system, the organisation that is gradually emerging to try and look after the patient and the public needs after the days of the CCGs end. So the idea is that there will be a merger from the CCGs across the region into a single entity taking those functions over. Obviously, in the Northeast, North Cumbria, we very much have been trying to have an inclusive process involving our local authorities, voluntary sector, various other people, and I'm sure Mark will explain something about that progress and then something about what the ask of us today is. Mark, over to you.
Mark, I think you've just pretty much covered off everything that I was going to say. So without further ado, I'll just pass across to Ali.
Thanks. Well, both Marks, that's great, and good afternoon, everybody. Really nice to see some familiar faces today as well. So good to see you. What I'm just going to do is, obviously, you've got a couple of bits of information in front of you. One's a covering paper that gives some background into why we are here looking at this sort of template document, this constitution or draft constitution just at this point in time, and particularly, as I think you mentioned, Mark, about how we're beginning to develop what the Integrated Care Board, which is going to be the statutory board, which will be replacing CCGs come April, assuming that the passage through Parliament, the passage of the bill through Parliament continues as expected, of course. So we just need to bear that part in mind. The covering paper obviously picks out those kind of main issues and particularly tries to emphasise what is required of the CCG governing bodies, which is a very strange ask. It's asking you to propose the draft constitution to NHS E&I. Now, we've got to recognise that this is a point in time. I would say this is more the start of the journey than the end. We clearly need to have a fully agreed constitution by March. The only people who are able to approve this constitution, particularly this first one, is NHS England. It is not the CCGs and it's not the ICB or any shadow form of the ICB at this stage. So, but of course, as we go through this journey, they want to see how we're progressing, if we're applying the right principles of good governance, if we're making some progress in deciding and designing what the board will look like at this stage, and who will be members of that board. Whether that be executives, non-executives or partner members. The board is quite different to something that we've probably seen in the past, so perhaps today it would be good to spend most time, if that's appropriate, perhaps discussing that part, because I think that's the area where perhaps most issues that may well come up from this model template might well come through. So there's a number of, what I'll do is, rather than go through sort of a line by line process, I'll just turn to the draft constitution. What I'll mention to start with is, and apologies for this, it says on the front draft and not for onward circulation. Quite clearly, this is a public meeting and it's right and proper that the public can see our work in progress and what we're planning to do. The reason why it's got the draft and not for onward circulation, I think, was originally we've been developing this with the support of a range of partners, from our FT colleagues, from local authorities and indeed CCGs via our accountable officers, who have been thinking about what does this system need to look like, what would a good board be like, and you know, how could we capture this in this rather turgid technical document. Now, it will be very familiar to most of you anyway, because it's actually used a model template which we've used in the CCG for some time. I mean, it's been developed a little bit. There are a few differences, but it's sort of style, which is which is not an easy read, to be honest. It feels like there's lots of duplication, etc. But that's being defined for us, and we've been asked to use this particular template. So there's only certain elements of this that we've been able to apply any sort of local perspective on. Some of it is in there and we can't change it, including some of the particular wording. So, and I probably, if you have queries about that, can probably answer those questions as we get to that page. So, several sections in this constitution talks about at the beginning, between the beginning and page 8, about the whole statutory framework for the ICB and how it should operate, what the composition of the board is on page 11, and we'll perhaps spend a bit of time on that one, an appointments process, how functions are exercised, how we make decisions, managing conflicts of interest, of course, which, as you know, is a critical part, accountability and transparency, terms and conditions of employees, and arrangements for public involvement. And there's an appendix 2, it's got the standing orders. Now, what it doesn't have with it is the governance handbook, which sits behind this document, and probably is the bit that you would be more interested in, because actually it talks about the scheme of reservation and delegation, terms of reference of some of the key committees. So the ones mentioned in this document at the moment are the required ones, the statutory ones. So that's your Audit and your Remuneration Committee. There will be other committees, of course, but the whole idea about this, if you remember, if you've ever had to try and change a constitution, is it can be a very lengthy process, because not only does it have to come through at the moment, the governing body then has to go to NHS England and they've got to review it and give a determination whether they accept the changes or not. And that can take many months. So what their advice is that we keep the information in this technical and legal document in a sense as brief as possible, and that all of the stuff that we may need to change from time to time, because that's just what needs to happen to make this workable, are captured within the governance handbook. What I can say to you is that governance handbook is being progressed as we speak. We're actually very close now to having most of those key documents prepared in draft form. We're doing a little bit of checking and read across to just make sure that it really captures what we need, and we're going to make sure that our accountable officers, our chief operating officers, etc., have got sight of that first, so they can have a look through and see if we've missed anything. And then we would expect that at some stage in the not too distant future, we will bring that back for you to have a look at, so you can give us your advice and expertise. Again, it's not to approve, but it is to use your expertise and advice. So it may be helpful to think about I think it's page 11, which starts the composition of the board. Now, there's some key requirements, statutory appointments, chair, chief exec, and as you know, we've got those, have both been appointed now, so they're in designate positions. We would also have to have a director of finance, a medical director and director of nursing, so those are the required ones, and 2 independent non-exec members. In addition, you are required to have partner members, and there's 1 each of local authority, FT and general practice. And there may well also be some sort of regular participants, observers to the board as well. So what has been proposed here, and this is where we do have some discretion, is that not only will there be those statutory director roles, but in addition, it's suggested that we have just turn to the right page, possibly a chief operating officer or something of the nature that would coordinate the work across the piece, director of digital and data, director of improvement and transformation, director of people, 3 executive directors of commissioning that would play out in a similar way to our AOs do at the moment in terms of supporting and managing the work that takes place at place. There's also a suggestion that there are 2 additional non-exec directors, so not just the one for Audit and Remuneration Committee, but 2 further non-exec directors. The likelihood being, of course, that at least one of those would be the patient and public involvement non-exec director role. And then the partner members, rather than just the 3 proposed, the suggestion now is that we have 4 local authority, 2 from FTs and 2 from primary care as well. And that would give, and the reason for that, although it makes a very large board, is that we've got a very large, in fact, the largest geographical patch, the most complex in terms of the numbers of partner organisations, etc., in the whole of the country. And actually, we've done some check-in from other parts of the country, and most have got quite a big board, actually. So we're not really an outlier in that, to be honest. And some people, in terms of the feedback we're getting, are even suggesting that there could be others added, because what we need to make sure is we get a good balance, so that we can operate well and make really good collective decisions. I'll point out that this is clearly a unitary board. There is an expectation that each of those partner members are not there to represent per se their organisation or their sector. They're there to take a view across the whole of the integrated care system, the collective of organisations and the population that then serves, to make the best possible decisions for the whole, not for one part or another of that. Which is a tough ask, I think, for some of the people, clearly, because you know, people may well want to make a particular case for their particular community. I think the key, though, is it's about what skills and experience and knowledge that each of those people will bring to the board. The other thing probably to note for you is that the proposal around certainly some of the regular participants does include not only directors with particular portfolio areas or senior members of an executive, but also a Health Watch representative, a representative of the Voluntary Community and Social Enterprise Partnership, and then, of course, any others from time to time that get identified by the chair. And finally, I think another key point to make is that it is tough to try and decide what's going to be a really good and effective board at this point in time. And so what's been written in there on page 26 is the plan to have a review, so an annual review of the shape and effectiveness of the board, so that changes can be made if that isn't going to work. Now, we do want to get it right, and so part of what I'm here today to ask you for is your feedback, which will be presented back to Sir Liam and indeed to Sam, the new chief exec, and he will take a view in the few days that we have before we have to submit this sort of first iteration, what things might be changed at this point, or what indeed we might need to consider, maybe not for this submission, but as we develop the constitution as we go forward. So I think I've covered most things. If I can leave it there and then open it up to questions, if that's okay, Mark. Unless Mark Adams, unless you think I've forgotten anything, Mark. I've got a frog in my throat today. I don't know why, so apologies if I hope you can hear me okay.
No, I think again, Ali, you've covered it all off. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ali, I guess just being really clear about what the ask is of our governing body, just to summarise there, as you said, I think the ask is that our governing body is to propose this, and it is still for NHS England to approve it. And obviously we are asked for our expertise in terms of making comments that we would like to be considered as part of this process, and how the governing, how the further governance evolves. I think we have Paul first, then Liz.
Hi, just two things. One, just a point of clarification for, I guess, the general public that might read this. On page 23, the 4 independent non-execs, I presume they're the equivalent of lay members, as people might know them.
Yeah, that's correct.
Excellent. It's just to clarify that for other people. And the other thing is, I guess, given what we've always said about the third sector, and how very important it is to the whole way we act, they do seem missing from the board, or having a voice on the board, which I would have thought they would have had one member on the board. I know they can be co-opted and looked at, etc., but that's very different from having a vote on the board and that representation on the board. And I think that's something that's missing.
Forgive me, Paul. I missed exactly who it was that you said. From which sector did you say?
The third sector, the voluntary sector.
Indeed. Yes, that's a really good point, and I shall take that one back. As I said, there will be regular participants, so they will always be asked to the board meetings. They will always be there, and I guess they'll be, but you're right, they're not down at this stage as voting members. But we do have, obviously, that are 4. The non-exec directors are meant to be independent directors, and you would hope that, as I say, that at least one of those anyway would be mindful of patient and public involvement, and you'd expect probably to work very closely with the voluntary community sector, etc. as well. I know that's not the same as what you've asked for, and I shall certainly make a note of that, but just to note that there is an opportunity there for representation to the board.
Thank you, Paul. And obviously, Louise, I know as you capture the minutes, we'll be summarising the actions that we want to feed back to this process as well. I think we've got Liz first, then Margaret, then Joe.
Hi, Ali. I'm Dr. Liz Moyler. I'm a GP in Gateshead. Thanks for your synopsis. I've just got a couple of questions, one concerning the non-executive members, and then the actual composition of the board, director of nursing and medical director. So 2 questions. The first one about these 4 independent non-executive members, and you alluded to the fact when you were answering Paul's question that perhaps they would have some patient participation interest and things. But I note that it said, you know, with the criteria that they have to meet, not hold a role in another health and care organisation in the ICB area. Now, so my question is surrounding that. Now, if they're not having a role in another health and care organisation, does that reduce the pool of people that you can actually be sort of quite good non-executive members? And why does it have to just be health and care organisations? Why isn't it not financial organisations, accountancy organisations, IT organisations in the area? So I'd quite like to expand on that, because obviously there is quite a lot of concern about who these non-executive members are going to be. So that's my first question, Ali. The second one is obviously about the medical director and the director of nursing, and who is going to be the medical director, and does this imply that this is a person from secondary care or primary care? And also the director of nursing, obviously this is whole thing is about integrated care, so I would really like to put forward the idea that the director of nursing should become maybe from a community background or a district nursing. You know, what are these terms, medical director and director of nursing? Can we drill down a bit into actually what those will involve?
And Ali, I'm going to suggest, rather than you answer them straight away, do you mind if we take a further few questions? Because I think there may be some on a similar theme before you answer it, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm trying to jot that down, Mark, but if you could keep a tally as well for me.
I am doing.
Thanks.
So can we go to Margaret, and then Margaret, Joe, then Dominic, then we'll come back to you, Ali, if that's all right.
Thanks. Hi, Ali. I'm a lay member here, and my thing is quality and safety. And I'd just like to ask, because the CCG has been very successful with quality and safety, because it's given very high priority at senior level, and because very great attention is paid to detail, how will quality and safety be represented at ICS level, and how can we be assured that we don't lose the grip that we have here in Newcastle Gateshead?
Thank you very much, Margaret. I think we're on to Joe next.
Probably a couple of points of clarification, Ali. We've talked, and within the cover letter, we're asked the CCG fulfil its legal obligations. We just need to understand what are those legal obligations and what are the obligations under guidance. If there are particular legal obligations, it would be helpful just to point to the particular act that provides obligations on the governing body, because we're struggling with that at the minute. You know, what are our legal obligations and what are obligations under guidance? Can I mention that? Can I answer that one just quickly, because I can't give you a full answer, Joe? Is that all right, Mark? Just to say that is what's detailed. It's a legal obligation within
I think it's in the frequently asked questions, but I'll double check that for you and I can come back to you on that one. I just need to find it, but it's written, we have it written. It's not just something we've made up.
No, it was, can you come back to us at a particular point in time just so the governing body can understand that? That didn't expect you to answer it here and now. It was just some other points as well in terms of the composition of the governing body. Questions, does it satisfy best practice in corporate governance in terms of all of the members of the board having voting rights, and even the executive composition as proposed, if they have voting rights, would outnumber the lay voters. And yeah, that'll do for now. Thanks.
We'll come to Dominic, and just checking, Margaret, if it's a new hand, that's fine. If it's otherwise, I'll let you take it down. Dominic next.
Yeah, hi Ali. I know we've known each other in many iterations over the years, but I'm currently the medical director here at the CCG. So 2 comments. One is that I think there should still be some ongoing reflection about those additional members of the board. And you've commented that whilst it's big, it's no bigger than other ICSs. I think my concern, or my comment, is really that if the structure is going to enable delegation, particularly to place, in terms of commissioning function, the larger the board we have at ICB, the harder it's going to be to sort of do that delegation. I think the 2 things will impact on each other. So I'd just like that to be noted, that, how will this sit if we have a very large board at ICB with the accountability, responsibility that we're hoping will emerge at place. Secondly, I think I just want to observe that we are in a period of time where we do have very long waiting lists for planned care, and that we do have provider collaboratives forming. Yet we all know that the vast majority of health and care contacts happen outside of our foundation trust, that maybe they're doing 10% of the most acute and most serious contacts. So I think with that in mind, I would support what Liz had said earlier about considering recruiting or looking as well in the pool of community district nursing for those people who might have that senior leadership experience for the nursing director. But in terms of the medical director, I chatted to Mark Adams a while ago, and I think it sounds like it's been discussed in other CCGs. The possibility that the medical director might be a shared role between primary care and secondary care medical director candidates.
Okay, Ali, I think we'll come back to you, and perhaps just to add on to Dominic's point, because I know it's been made in other conversations, that there's also an aim for the medical director and perhaps even nursing director to have some active clinical work to augment their ability to represent the public and those in the service and understand the situation. So if there was a job share or some other way of enabling an active clinical person from holding those roles, we do think that would be a helpful one as well. Anyway, I'll let you go through the points, but I have jotted them down if we miss any.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Just I think if we kind of start there in terms of those particular members, what I guess, these are required roles. The first thing to say is that there has been a national role scope for the medical and the nursing directors that we've had to use to start to put together a job description. So that's the first thing, because there's some clear requirements of every medical director, of every director of nursing. However, I think there will be these are requests, we're talking about them as being particularly, these are all new roles. They are very senior leadership roles, and there is an expectation that people have a very rounded skill set and experience set that is pertinent to the job that they're going to have to do. And I think there's been a lot said about, the ICB needs to be quite different. It is quite different. It is very much, it probably also relates to the question that you've asked, Dominic, and I think it relates to it's to do with the way of working. So the way of working has to be about coordination, facilitation, supporting what needs to happen, because the importance of place-based working has been strongly made. And I think our ICB leadership as it stands currently, so that is formerly Liam and indeed the new chief exec, are absolutely completely convinced that that's the appropriate way forward. So you would expect that the person or persons who are appointed to those roles were well qualified, very experienced senior leaders, who of course will also have a team where we'd expect a range of different skills and experience amongst that team. So I would say that there will certainly not be anything that would exclude any particular people who work in any particular area. So medical directors, it could equally be someone who comes from primary care or from an acute sector or whatever. I don't think there's any reason, why you would necessarily particularly say that you wanted to exclude one another. You certainly wouldn't. I can't see that that's something that would be done. I think your idea of sort of shared roles, that kind of thing, and clinical work are really good ones. It has been made by others, and I think we should feed that back. I think that's, those are really, great examples, not just about, I don't think they're things that you change in the Constitution, but they're about how do we enact the Constitution to make it really workable, given that the way of working that we're trying to foster. So I can take those back, but just be assured that there's clearly a requirement from a national perspective. Actually, not only did they give us a role scope, but they also wanted to check our job descriptions as well, just how marvellous NHS England are at this sort of stuff at times. So not only have they given us the job role scope, but they've said, now when you've put that into your own job description, let us have a look at it again, just to make sure we think it's fit for purpose. So but there shouldn't be anything that would stop us. I'm sure they wouldn't stop us from trying to be broad in the kind of skill sets that we're looking for, or indeed the way that we do that. There's HR issues as well, isn't there, about, if people want to do job shares, those kind of things, we would absolutely want to look at that positively, because that would be the way of working that we've agreed through our HR policies. So that's to try and pick up on those ones, and particularly those medical ones. Now then, there was the one about the non-executive members, and why not, and I've scribbled something I can't see, which it was what Liz asked about first, Liz.
It was about the fact that they were not allowed to hold a role in another care organisation, but then, why can they just hold a role in other organisations like finance or IT, but not health and care?
Yeah, I guess it's a conflict of interest issue. And again, it's about the unitary board element, but I know that we've satisfied those things in other scenarios, including CCGs. It's not a one that we've added. It's part of the national template. It's part of the requirement. It's in the Act, in fact, that's the eligibility and what would disqualify somebody from doing it. Those are actually written in the Act. Whether that will be changed, I'm honestly not clear. It could be, that could be one of the areas as it goes through Parliament that someone raises and it does get changed. But I guess that's what it's trying to manage, a conflict of interest from a healthcare perspective, from people who might want to apply if they're actually also working in another organisation. There was a bit about also a balance, wasn't there, about this whole balance, this big board and the balance of execs to non-execs. One of the things I think if you accept that the partner, whilst the partner members will be drawn from FTs, GPs or whatever, so in a sense they will be executives in their own right, they will not hold an executive portfolio with the board. So quite unusual this, I suppose, but I suppose you could argue that they are more independent in the sense that they're not part of the executive. So you could say that they're on the other side of that particular fence. And if you did do that, then we do have a majority of non-exec or non-exec-like individuals on the board. So it does give us just that balance that you would be that you would be looking for, but it is something that we've talked about loads and tried to work out how best that needs to be. I think what's probably also quite important, I think you made a good point, Dominic, if we're talking about what goes and what's managed at a local place level, you know, why would you have such a big board? And the board obviously has got to be set up in order to fulfil its statutory responsibilities. The way that it does that, though, of course, can be quite different. And I think this is not about retaining necessarily control. I mean, it's a very big organisation, big complex geographical patch, as you're aware, lots of local authorities, different ways of doing things. There will be an element of needing to, even if things are done at a local level and delegated at a local level, the ICB will be responsible collectively, if you like, for what it does and how it does it. And I guess that's what's determined the requirement for some of these key roles. We were encouraged to look at a digital director. We were encouraged very strongly for a people director as well. So I guess there's, and also around innovation, transformation. So I think there has been some thought about this nationally as well, and I think we've been encouraged to go down this route. And again, if you look at some of the other compositions of boards from other places, these are very similar roles as well, but it isn't any attempt to retain, you know, the work at that level. It's about coordination, strategic view, facilitating the work that will happen at a place-based level. How do I have others? Yes, quality and safety. How will that be represented at an ICS level? Clearly, in both the medical and the nursing role descriptions that have been provided to us nationally, there's a very strong element in both of those, as it happens, on quality and safety. Obviously, the key issue will be about how we balance that, you know, who's actually accountable and who's doing what part of those things, and that will be you know, something that has to be clear, so that we know that we're getting the right skills, there's no dropping things through gaps because too many people are trying to do, you know, be really coordinated approach. What we've also been doing is by working with some of the regional quality and safety team have been working with some of our own, you know, nursing and you know, quality and safety teams to think about what that new system needs to look like for the future. There will definitely be a quality committee, I can give you that absolute assurance. We're just trying to work out, because they're going to change some of this, you know, the quality surveillance arrangements. So this is how we dovetail between what is required from a regional level and what we need to do at an ICS level. But those things are already in train, and we are working on terms of reference and a system of how that could happen, because you're absolutely right, that's critical. The worst thing we could do would be to make an organisational change and find that we lost all the good work that's been happening so far in relation to quality and safety. So that's absolutely up there as a key priority. Anything else? Voting, I've covered that. I actually think, have I covered that? I think I've covered them all, Mark. Not in the order that they came in, but I think I've covered all of them.
Don't worry. Thank you for that, Joe and Bill, and then we've got Julia.
It's just to come back on a couple of points, if I may. I mean, we've talked at length and made great play that the board is unitary, and individuals around the table are there to offer their expertise, and it's not geographical based. And yet, on the other hand, we are going to great lengths to make sure we've got good geographical representation. In terms of voting rights, and getting back to this issue about providers and other bodies, you could argue are not part of the organisation. I think they do have an interest in the business, and they are conflicted. And I don't know whether just looking at the voting rights, we could manage some of those conflicts of interest, and just the voting rights are restricted to lay members and to the statutory appointments, and in that way you could deal with all of the potential conflicts of interest and governance issues around sort of Cadbury in best governance and best practice. And I did have one other point that slips me, so I'll hand over to someone else, and I may come back if you don't mind, Mark.
Can I just answer that?
Sorry,
one?
can I? Sorry, I do know what it is. Before we jump and think that a split role is a good idea, we just need to think about the governing body. If we say have a medical director or a CFO that is a split role and gets conflicting advice, how does it deal with that? So I think the way to manage that, and again, it's just a personal observation, is to have a single medical director role, but be clear there's policy advisor or a deputy from primary care and there's a deputy from secondary care. But to have a split role may put the governing body in a very, very difficult position. That was my other point. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Joe. But either way, we would want to make sure we get representation from both primary and secondary care, and ideally from active clinical people. I think we're coming to Bill next, then Julia.
Thank you, Mark. I take your point, Ali, about the quality committee, and it'll be a useful function. However, if this is chaired by a non-exec or a layperson that has a purely financial background, I can see that quality will not necessarily take precedence, and in my present occupation accepted, and that is secondary care clinician for the CCG, I've yet to come across a finance person who will allow me as a medical person to drive the quality agenda. And there are no checks and balances, and certainly looking at the 14 Henri Fayol criteria that are there, that will preclude such a problem. So I remain concerned and sceptical that somebody from a double glazing firm as overseeing the quality aspect of medicine for the ICS is going to fulfill those roles. So I remain concerned and anxious on behalf of the future.
Can I respond to these then, Mike? First of all, Bill, I don't think for a minute that will happen, because these not, I think the two defined roles in terms of chairing committees are the Audit Committee and the Remuneration Committee. And there is a requirement for the audit one in particular to be financial non-exec. The others clearly haven't got that requirement, you know, the additional two particularly, but probably the three, because I don't think Remuneration Committee requires someone with a financial background necessarily either, because it's not about adding up the sums as it were, it's not about adding up the money. My experience is that usually quality committees are led by, if they are led by a non-exec, they are very closely worked with the Director of Nursing, and in some cases the medical director, and I cannot see that we would want to do anything different to that, but I will make sure I take that point back to make sure that that's given appropriate thought before that's agreed about who should chair that particular committee. But that committee will be there. There'll be a separate finance committee as well, I would say. I'd expect there probably would be someone who had some kind of, or might be someone with financial background. Not necessarily appropriate that they should lead the finance committee either, because sometimes that independent perspective is helpful. But from a quality one, I think it's a little bit different, and I would probably expect it to be a clinician of some sort. So, but I don't know that for sure, so I shall make sure I make a note of that, and I'll feed that back just to give you some assurance.
Just to come back on that, Ali, I'm aware, I'm a senior inspector for the CQC, and I've put the feet of many audit chairs to the fire, and they've always come back and said that they're heavily outnumbered by clinicians, be they nursing or medical, and that is one of the checks and balances that I would expect to see. I'm not sure I see it here yet.
Yeah.
You know, trust me, I'm a reorganisation of the NHS. doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if I can just remind you, obviously, these are what's written in the Constitution at the moment. It's the kind of de minimis. It's the stuff that we kind of statutorily have to have in there so that you'll get a better picture, a broader picture when you see perhaps the other terms of reference for other committees, etc. If I can go back to Joe's point about the geographical, because I think what you were saying, Joe, is you could change, if you change the voting, so perhaps the partners who come from potentially conflicted organisations were non-voting. We're certainly required to have one each of the local authority and FT and primary care. So they're required, therefore they're required to be members, i.e. voting on the board. So that's a requirement. I guess we could say that the other three, because we've added to that, and we've said we want 4 of those and to each of those, I think we could say that maybe they shouldn't all be voting, but then that might leave us in another difficult situation. Around the geographical spread, I think you're right. It's a really tricky one. And the trouble is when you say, oh, we'll have 4 of those, then there's a kind of obvious, well, it'll be around the patch. And I think sensibly in the discussions in the joint management exec group in the meeting, they did say, well, actually, for example, with the local authorities, if we have 4, we'll allow 4 representatives because it's really important. Working with our partners in local authorities is going to be critical. It's about health and care that we're trying to address, and we're trying to address this very differently, etc. So we're really keen to have a bigger group of people. And there was a suggestion initially that those people might be the leads for some of the local authority, areas that, so I think they chair some meetings where they're the kind of a lead person. And at the moment, apparently, all of those people come from Durham. And what the local authorities themselves said, now that doesn't feel right. If we say, well, it's all of the chairs and they all happen to be all Durham, or even next, in 6 months' time, all Newcastle, or 6 months' time, all from Middlesbrough, then that doesn't feel right, doesn't feel quite right. So what they've talked about is making sure that membership is perhaps one will be a chief exec of one of the local authorities, another will be a director of public health, another will be director of adult services, another will be director of children's services, and that seems sensible. And I think everybody collectively thought, well, that would be really good, because then you'd get the skill set and the perspective around, which is focused on patients, on our population, and not focused on the particular geographical patch that they're coming from. So that's the idea, I think, to try and avoid the geography, but at the same time, I guess, recognising that if everybody came from one town, it would feel a bit uncomfortable for all of us, I think. So we have to just try and balance that out.
Ali, we've got 3 hands up. Do you mind if we go to them next, or review something else?
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think we've got Julia, then Liz, and then Paul.
Thanks, Mark. So I just wanted to give a little bit of assurance to Liz around the quality and safety aspect. And I guess for me, it's worth reflecting on how we've got to this point. So very early when we were establishing ourselves as a CCG, our strategy was that we were clinically led, managerial enabled, and I think that's what's led us to be an outstanding organisation. And for me, it's about how we keep building on that and making things better, not losing anything that we've established so far. I do think some of Bill's challenges have been very robust and very welcome, and I would be really upset if we lost some of that. Equally, I think the balance between primary care and when I say primary care, I mean primary care in the round, so not just GPs, but dentistry, ophthalmology, etc., because our patients use all of those services. So it's really important when we say primary care, it's that inclusive primary care. And I think I'm just very mindful that this reorganisation is essentially our commissioning functions. So one of the conversations we've had with our Director of Nursing discussions is that it is that realignment of commissioning and how we get the best of that into the new organisation. So just to assure Liz that we'll have very robust conversations with Margaret Kitchen, our regional nurse, who's extremely supportive and influential in the discussions. And we'll meet as a group of directors of nursing, both commissioning, and also we'll meet with provider directors of nursing as well, because it's important we get that balance. And those discussions will continue until we get the operating model shared and we know what that architecture is going to be. And we've developed a number of options. So once we know what that is, we'll be able to, you know, align the functions quite quickly, I think. So I feel quite positive about that discussion.
Thanks very much. Should we keep going down our list? So I think Paul was next. Oh, sorry, Liz is next and then Paul. Apologies.
Okay. Hi, yeah, Ali. It was just to, as we're talking about this, and just looking at your proposed constitution paper that you did with Mark Adams and yourself, you do mention in content of the constitution, number 17, you say the elements can be locally determined concerning the size and composition of the integrated care board. So even though we're talking about like this nationally, you could say, imposed structure, it seems from your paper that you and Mark wrote that it's actually can be the size and composition of this ICB can be locally determined. Do you actually think that's correct?
Yes, it's a bit of both, though, to be perfectly honest with you, Liz, because what it is there are some requirements, and I think what's set out in the paper are the kind of the minimum requirements, being the chair, chief exec, you know, CFO, director of finance, director of nursing, medical director, and then the number of partner members. So it has been determined nationally that it has to include those people. The difference is the numbers and the kind of shape of the executive function have largely been left to ourselves, other than those key ones that I've just mentioned, the 3 statutory roles. But I would say, having said all of that, that it's interesting that we've had role scopes sent for the director of people, the director of digital, or whatever, you know, that we might want to consider, if you like. And certainly in terms of the partner members and the non-execs, I mean, the non-execs, 2 is the requirement, so you can function with only 2 non-execs. That's what statutorily it says, and that's what it'll say in the Act. But again, as I said, we've had the option, if we wanted to increase that number. We couldn't reduce it. We wouldn't be allowed to do that, but we could increase it. And equally the same with partner members. So we couldn't reduce it from 3, 1 each from the local authority, primary care and the FTs, but we could expand it, and that's what we've done, and that's, I suppose, why we've ended up with a much bigger board. And I think it is a really difficult one, this, because I think there is this balance between how easy is it going to be to have a really good debate and make good decisions with a very big, what you could argue could be quite an unwieldy board, but equally, given the sort of size, complexity in all of the things and the new way of working that this is meant to be, is a smaller number the right number as well? And I just think it's a very difficult answer that. I don't know that there is a right one. And I think what's through discussion, and you know, Salim has not only held these JMEG meetings, but he's also had, he's done about 80 or 80 plus individual conversations with professionals, he's talked to professional groups, he's talked to all sorts of different people about what would be best. And I think through those conversations, he feels that this is, at this stage, kind of his best, not guess, because that would be the wrong word to use, but he's come up with this as probably the thing that could probably work, covers all the right areas, is quite inclusive, allows a range of experience and expertise and knowledge to be brought to the table to decision making. But equally, we've said, you know, we'll see how it works in a year's time. But, you know, let's see what happens. Might have to reflect on that again.
Okay, thanks. Can we bring?
If I can just come in, Mark, for a second, I think that's a really important point, that it is really tricky to get these things right, as we all know. And boards do change in composition. I mean, and it is the biggest ICS in the country, and that balance between a manageable board that can make decisions and a board that is representative for the size of geography that we've got and the range of functions that we have to cover, that's a really tricky ask. And I think this point about at some point in the future having a point at which the ICB will take some time to just sit back and reflect on the boards that it's put in place and decide whether they are doing the job that they need to do and whether they work is a really important and positive point to be at, I think.
If I can just add actually as well, there's another key part of this, which is the development that goes alongside this. So that you know, board development is going to be critical to making this work well, and that's definitely on our radar already.
So if I can perhaps bring in Paul, and then if there are any questions from the public, it'd be really helpful to bring those in as well at that point. Thanks.
Actually, just to come back to quality, one of the things that I think we felt we needed a bit more assurance on was the fact that we wouldn't have things like the hospital trusts and things marking their own homework, because following on from North Staffs is that there was that great emphasis in kind of that whole quality role and having independence. And given that everybody's on the board together now, how do we make sure that not only is that quality maintained, but seen to be maintained and not kind of marked by the people who are, in one sense, being held to account through quality and risk?
I think that's a really good point, actually, Paul. But I suppose, I guess the whole tenor of this change, I think, is very much about, can we achieve more by working in partnership? Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to play their part, and they have to play it honestly and with the patient's best interests at heart in relation to that. There will be checks and balances in the system. There will be elements of performance management, if I can use that, what's usually a dirty word, to include everything, including things which are quality orientated, because even waiting lists are a quality issue, aren't they? Of course, because of the damage they can do for people waiting a long time for things. So that kind of level of assurance will still be required. Absolutely, I don't think that's going to change. But it's about, can we do more by working together to achieve these things, which I'm sure the things that Julia has just said about the way you've been working is how you've worked. It hasn't been a them and us and a we'll tell you to do and you should go away and do it. And it's about, can we work better together to achieve what we need to do? I think we're very strongly, and I know you do this anyway, but we're very strongly going to be working with our local authority partners as well. We are committed to working with voluntary sector organisations, community groups, etc. And that whole patient voice and patient involvement and inclusiveness is really, really important. And I can, just at a personal level, I can tell you, I had my first conversation this morning with the new chief exec, and she is very, very patient oriented and very wants to see patients have a real voice. So I do think that it is doable. I think it's what this reform is really about. And I think we'll still have some checks and balances in the system because we'll have to.
Thank you very much, Ali. So I'm assuming that there are no questions from the public, but if there were any, it'd be really helpful to hear from them now. And I'm assuming that everyone has made their points, or if there are any further points before we move on. In which case, can I say a huge thank you, Ali, and obviously many people behind the background for both having a thought through of all the different questions we've been asking. Obviously, we passionately want to get the best for our public, and we started with a patient story today, absolutely listening to the great work that has happened by trying to move on opportunities that person didn't have in the past to giving them much better opportunities in the future. We desperately hope that our world in the future will enable many more people to have great opportunities in the way that they manage their issues. I guess we will have to therefore just check with the board if we are able to do what we were asked, which is to propose this current version. Obviously, with the number of points that we've made, we want to be considered as part of that process, and I guess we will welcome receiving that next version, but also the governance handbook that you've mentioned and further information, Ali. So are there any objections to us following the path that's been recommended for us to propose that as we've been asked? Nope. Okay, so we'll go ahead with doing that, Ali. Thank you for taking the time, and obviously Louise and us will try and craft all the different contributions to make sure we have a full feedback written down as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thanks,
Ali.
Ali.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks very much. So we have 1 or 2 items left, and I think the next item we're coming to Joe in terms of our priorities and operational planning. Joe. I'm glad I'm not the only one that struggles with the unmute button, but good luck when you find it.
It toggles quicker than I. So thanks, Mark. In the interest of time, this paper just sets out in terms of H2 priorities, those of which we as a CCG will be taking forward as part of an ICP and as part of an ICS plan. It really does sort of build on the priorities in the first half of the year. It's probably no surprise, those being around 6 priority areas in terms of supporting the health and well-being of staff, and we've talked about recruitment and retention, and also staff welfare in times of this escalated activity, and particularly in terms of what they've come out of in terms of the various waves of COVID so far. In terms of delivery of the vaccination programme, and again, we are seeing escalations of the rollout of the programmes that Julia's talked about earlier. And also a key component of our work is building on what we've learned in terms of efficiencies in delivery of healthcare by way of delivering services in other ways. And again, we see that both across sort of secondary and primary care. In terms of mental health, we will continue to focus on the workforce and also focus on particular vulnerable groups in terms of the context of inequalities amongst those vulnerable groups, those people with autism, those people with other learning disabilities, but also children, ensuring that children and young people get the best start in life. And we are seeing a number of initiatives across both Newcastle and Gateshead in terms of children and young family centres and also the Thrive agenda. We are looking to continue support primary care, and we are investing in a number of initiatives in primary care to support capacity over the winter, and also in terms of working collaboratively with other parts of the system. We do focus on Collaborative Newcastle and also Gateshead in terms of taking forward the system work, particularly in the context of our inequalities, and we are investing again in equalities programmes both in Newcastle and in Gateshead that I talked about earlier under the finance section of the report. Perhaps one other thing to say in terms of the oversight framework for 2021, section 5 sets out a new framework that will be system based in terms of our ICP that we're working on across Gateshead and north of Tyne. So very much the oversight framework across the priority areas that's set out in 5.2 will be measured on that systems basis. And 5.3 shows areas that in terms of our organisation, but also our major providers, our hospital services, where we are in the lower quartile, but also where we are performing well. So those will be areas of focus across the system in terms of those various organisations. I'll stop there, Chair, and just invite questions.
Thank you. Any further questions that people have? Appreciating there has been some of this aired already. No, if not, we'll go straight on to item 11.3, which, Joe, is still with yourself.
So this is the HR and OD report for quarter 2. In terms of one or two highlights, we have seen a reduction in headcount in Q2 compared to Q1, which is quite normal in terms of the business cycle. We have seen a number of people leave the organisation, and part of the inquiry with the leavers is whether the uncertainty of the changes ahead are causing them to leave. That's generally not the case. It's normally, career progression, which is actually very welcomed. But where we are seeing a pressure is a lack of success in recruitment rounds. So people are not applying for the jobs as and when they come up by way of replacement vacancies. In terms of sickness absence, we have again seen a reduction in Q2 on Q1, which continues to complete a trend. We are still, as a CCG, slightly higher compared to our peers in terms of the average sickness absence rate, and we have seen a continuation of stress, anxiety and depression as being the major cause of certainly short-term sickness absence. We have, as part of our staff sessions, focused on mental health and mental well-being as part of our staff sessions, and part of the wellbeing programme that we do have in terms of the health and wellbeing group. And Appendix 1 sets out a lot of the activity that we undertake during staff sessions to support staff in terms of particularly mental health, but also other aspects of physical health and wellbeing. Again, I'll stop there, Chair, in the interests of time, and invite questions.
Thanks very much, Joe. And it's so important to support our workforce when there are so many challenges. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, so many people tired, and also, a number of bits of uncertainty in the system. Any questions that anyone has on that item? In which case, we'll move on to section 12 and assume there are no questions from the public, and we'll move on to the risk register, which is with Neil.
I should put a couple of slides. I'll be very brief as well, Mark, because there's not much to report this reporting period. So this is the risk profile for the organisation. This is this still newish matrices. So we've got red, amber, yellow and green on there now. But the only one change we've made this reporting period from a risk kind of closure point of view is one operational risk. It was quite a low scored risk around the process in place for safeguarding reports and primary care, and now that process is established now, so we've just closed that risk down and taken it off the risk register. So there'll be no new risks created this time, and none of the risks have changed in score, although we have had risk owners review all the risks and see if all the controls are appropriate and whether we need to put any mitigations in place, but we haven't had anything significant that's changed the scores. So that's all there is. I've just flashed up the three red risks we still have on the risk register, which have been on since the previous reporting period. Again, no changes in the scores, but we have reviewed those, and I know there's lots of activity happening in the background to mitigate these risks, and we've talked about it and had reports on some of these as part of the meeting today. But that's all I wanted to flash up from a reporting point of view, and obviously the assurance framework's been included in the appendices, which has all the detail. But happy to take any questions, but not a huge amount to report this reporting period.
Thank you, and I know that people do raise concerns and questions to you, and also ask you to adjust risks when they perceive things have changed. So thank you for all what you do, Paul.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, increasingly, certainly around the country, primary care sounding very fragile. Do we need to reconsider that as a risk in our area?
I think it's still on the risk register, Paul. Certainly, it's reviewed regularly, and it goes to primary care committee, and we've got a few risks, but one on the top of the risk register for the primary care committee is around the sustainability of primary care. I don't know it off by heart, but certainly workload and workforce of primary care is going to be in the key themes. But it is a part of the assurance framework, and it is on there. But we can certainly review whether the scoring we've got is appropriate, and we will do that in the next reporting period.
Thanks, Paul. But I think the important thing is it is regularly reviewed as to what we can do to try and make a positive difference to try and prevent the problem that we all perceive and see happening elsewhere in the country. And huge amounts are going on for all of these risks, and not least for that one. So thank you very much. I'm assuming no questions from anyone else or from the public on this item. We do have a number of items for information enclosed in section 13. We do have our next meeting date on the in section 14. That will be towards the end of January, and we do give consideration about how we can try and meet together in public at some point, not least to see faces that we haven't seen for a while, but also to try and give a better opportunity for the public and trying to think how other people might be able to see what the work is that we do and be able to ask questions and contribute. Obviously, COVID has made that be very difficult over the last year, and we continue to welcome any ideas people have about contributions and how we can involve the public more in these meetings. So any ideas, please do feed them through me, Neil, or others, and we'd be very grateful for them. I guess we should just perhaps end and just say a huge thank you to so much work that goes on behind the scenes to get these reports ready for the governing body, and so much work that's happening just in our commissioning organisation, but also across the whole public sector. It does feel as though there's a lot of work going on there, and obviously at very difficult times. It was great to have our patient story today. We've been trying to have patient stories with each of our meetings, and we will endeavour to continue that pattern. So if people do have ideas of patient stories, we would very much welcome you to let us know. Our aim is very much to give people a bit like we had today, the in-depth experience of how families have experienced illness or services through their journey of interactions with services. And I thought today's example was really helpful to try and see those services we've all heard of, and we've very much tried to work hard to address challenges we've heard, but having a patient experience makes it so much easier for us to see the benefits that our new services are offering and the harm that perhaps some of our older ways of doing things was for individuals. I guess we should also just end by thinking the huge impact still that COVID has, not least on the number of waits that people have, as we've discussed, but also on the impact on our staff, as we've discussed, but also on the impact on our public. And I guess any messaging people can think about how we help our public stop the spread of the virus, and particularly with the new variant around, we are very, very keen to try and see if there's anything we can do to prevent our public experiencing further harm. We would love any ideas on how we increase vaccine uptake. We'd love any ideas on how we try and prevent the virus spreading and reduce the impact on our services. But that remains a huge, huge concern for all of us. We are going to launch a public campaign very soon to try and help people understand about some of these pressures, and try to make sure that the public understands some of the pressures that are out there, but also some of the opportunities for people when there are long waits in A&E to use community pharmacy, to use some of the other alternatives that are still able to provide and meet people's needs, and also to try and make it clear when people have queries about vaccines or queries about other elements where they should go, because we do appreciate it's a confusing world out there at the moment. That's probably all I think we had on our agenda today. I don't know if anyone has any final points or reflections on how this meeting has gone, or ideas for our next one before we finish. I am conscious that a number of people have a meeting shortly, and therefore we probably do want to get them the ability to grab a drink and have a brief stretch of their legs. So in which case we will end, but please do hold any of those ideas or thoughts, and please do contact us offline, and we'll be really grateful for your thoughts about shaping future meetings or any of the aspects we've discussed. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. I'm really grateful for your contributions. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.